Call this meeting to order. Can we all rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, first item, Twyla, would be the roll call.
Counselor Bowie?
Here.
Counselor Bickford?
Here.
Counselor Cody?
Here.
Counselor La Rochelle?
Here.
Counselor Lunt?
Here.
Counselor Mason?
Here.
Counselor Pomelo?
Here.
All right, next item, Twyla.
There's no public hearings. Consent agenda. Order 2011-08A to approve the minutes of November 16 and December 21, 2010.
Do I have any discussion on that item?
So moved. I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, seeing none, I will ask for a vote on that. All in favor? And those opposed?
Order passed 7-0.
Next item.
Under Council Orders, Resolutions, and Ordinances, Order 2011-9, Proposal for Tax Assessment Services.
Mr. Van Tynen is here tonight to go over the proposal that he made, and just go through it briefly and answer any questions anybody has. And we can have this more discussion of this during the workshop once you have that.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tynen. If you'd present that to us.
I tried to develop a proposal for your consideration that addressed a couple of different things, and to some degree with a couple of different methods. One thing that you have to decide to do is how to handle the regular tax assessment function, the day-to-day work that needs to be done, responding to abatement requests, reading deeds, processing deeds, making the ownership changes, drawing splits on the tax map and valuing the resulting parcels, sending out informational requests of personal property accounts, assessing the personal property for next year, valuing new construction, and just the normal, everyday tax assessment function. And I've tried to address that in the proposal. It's also my suggestion that you carefully consider options of updating your valuation. We did an update of the valuation this year with a simple trending of the previous year's value to achieve an overall ratio, valuation ratio of 80%. But everything is based upon base information that is from a 19, and I believe it's 89 revaluation of the town. Data that this year becomes 21 years old, 22 years old, with information that was probably very carefully gathered in the field and was accurate at the time that it was gathered, but is now reasonably out of date. So I've tried to give you some ideas, very specific ideas of how you may proceed to try to address those two separate and distinct needs, taking care of the day-to-day functions and how to update things for the future. And I've given you a summary on page 3 of the number of various accounts that you have in town. You have about 232 personal property accounts, business personal property accounts on your tax rolls. You have a few very major accounts. You've got a hydroelectric plant on the Androscoggin River. You have a public electric utility company, CMP. You have a natural gas pipeline. You have about 4,041 real estate accounts in all. You have 270 plus or minus that are commercial, about 719 mobile homes, about 2,614 residential homes, 7 mobile home parks, about 366 mobile homes within parks. Total land and building accounts that have land and buildings together, about 2,967, and about 542 land-only accounts. And in order to give you any kind of a meaningful proposal, I had to develop that kind of information to know what I was dealing with in trying to give you some information. Based on this count, a total revaluation of the town, in my opinion, would cost $300,000 to $310,000. I make my living doing revaluation work. That's my estimate of what it would cost to do a total revaluation of the town. And I'll take a minute just to review what goes into a revaluation, because not everybody is familiar with it. Not everybody understands it the same way. But one of the steps of a revaluation is doing a sales analysis, where you try to develop an appraisal system based on sales that have occurred over a 2 or 3 year period of time, and develop a system that works with the sales. The method you use to test with sales is called sales ratio analysis, where you try to achieve a ratio of assessed valuation to sales prices as revealed by sales in a period of time of close to 100%, with what's called a tight coefficient of dispersion. You want all of the sales ratios to be very close to that average ratio. Another step of a revaluation is measuring and listing all of the homes and all of the buildings in town, where you go out with a tape measure, you go out with a property record card, you sketch the building, you photograph the building, you try to secure an interior inspection in as many buildings as you possibly can to gather good, accurate, current information about all of the individual properties that exist in the town. Part of that effort is called callbacks. Obviously, not everybody's there when you knock on the door the first time. You have to make a callback effort to get inside when people are there. That often ends with sending a letter or leaving a callback notice that asks the taxpayer to call to make an appointment to look at their property. From that, you develop a preliminary appraisal of each property, where you use the information that you gathered on the individual property, you use the cost schedules, land schedules, depreciation schedules, the appraisal guidelines that you developed in the sales analysis, and you apply it to all the properties in town. You do the same thing with the commercial industrial property. You try to gather the property in a systematic way and develop a preliminary valuation of each property. And then you do a review where you do a double check. You make sure that the valuation is reasonable, that the valuation relates equitably and fairly from one property to another, that the valuation that you're arriving at is reasonable with a double check, just to make sure that the valuation that you've computed is reasonable for the property that it represents. Another step in the revaluation process is to send out notices to all the property owners in town and have an informal hearing process where there's no need for an abatement, taxes have not yet been committed, but you notify people of the valuation of their property. If at all possible, you notify them of the estimated taxes on their property based on that valuation, and you give them a chance to come in and discuss it with you, review it with you, and you try to go out and reconcile as many problems and issues that might be uncovered in the informal hearing process. Personal property is a substantial part of your tax base. Even though you had a shift away from personal property, there's still a substantial number of accounts and some substantial accounts in your town. That has to be valued as part of a revaluation process. So that's what's involved in a revaluation, and my estimate is that a complete revaluation, if you tried to get it done in a 2-year period of time, I think it's possible that somebody might try to complete a revaluation in a year period of time, but I think that would be a tight time frame for a town the size of Lisbon. The cost range is $300,000 to $310,000. It would also be possible to do something that timed it in, that where not everything was accomplished in as quick a period of time, but we made steady progress over a period of time to, at the end of, say, 4 years, update everything to 100% of value. In my particular approach, I have suggested to you the following. One is to document all the mobile home information in the town, because that appears to be a place, in my opinion, where you've got an information gap. In the process of updating things this year, in my opinion, there's just not enough documentation on each mobile home, how big it is, why it's valued at the particular value that it is. I would suggest that you collect the mobile home information and get those records in order. I would recommend that you streamline the process in the assessor's office. Right now, for example, I'm trying to make some decisions on a few abatement requests. And when I do that, I go back to your original 1989 appraisal manual. I try to double-check the calculations that were made with that 1989 appraisal manual. If something was calculated incorrectly, such, for example, I had one today where it was assumed that the person had living area over a garage. It's just storage over a garage. So I had to go back to the manual, recalculate it, add it all together, come up with a 1989 value, and then multiply it by 1.32 so that it was the valuation in line with other valuations for this year. That's an awkward, time-consuming process. It entails a lot of manual work. It has extra steps. I think that it would be very, very feasible to fine-tune the schedules that are on your computer system. Your computer system is called Trio software, so that it substantially coincided with the original schedules multiplied by 1.32, so that if we have to value a new house, if we have to value a new mobile home, we can just do it in a one-step reasonable process rather than a multi-step process that is what needs to be done right now. I think it would be a reasonable thing for you to review or have someone review your high-value properties. You have the 3 properties that I mentioned earlier, a hydroelectric plant, public utility, a natural gas pipeline. You've got a substantial number of properties that have over $1 million value, apartment complexes, commercial buildings. I just think it would be prudent to review those valuations and make sure they're right, and if they're not right, to change them. I think that your assessment records, over time at least, ought to include photographs of the buildings. I'm frankly very surprised, almost shocked, that your records don't include that already. It's pretty fundamental to have a photograph of a property on a property record card, and your records have none of that. I think it would be reasonable to incorporate sketches on the computer system as part of your assessment record, to have everything in one place, to have all of your computer records, all of your assessment records computerized, done in one system, stored on a hard disk, backed up regularly, all in a secure computerized format. Personal property, I think you've made great strides on. I think that the way the personal property was done this year is a reasonable way to do the personal property. It's all in a computer system with the best information that your previous assessor had at his disposal on original cost for each account. It's depreciated in a systematic way. It adjusts automatically to the 80% valuation ratio of the town. I think it yields a defendable valuation that serves the town well. I think that ought to be continued and improved a bit, but it's a very good base to start on. I think that it probably would be a good idea if you were going to update values, and I would suggest that that is a very good idea, that you begin an inspection process of all the properties in town, residential, commercial, industrial. And I would suggest that a reasonable way to do that would be to perfect the data collection and the data entry on 1/4 or so of the buildings a year. And the idea is not to value those buildings in any year out of line with anything else in town. It's to get good data on that property, to get it stored in a computer so that it could be updated with the whole town all at the same time. I would suggest that it's probably reasonable to, as you inspect property, if you find a shed, if you find a garage, if you find that the heating system's been changed from an electric heating system, the hot water heating system, that kind of physical change be incorporated in the new valuation in the year that it's discovered. But the actual updating of the valuation of all properties to 100% of value should all be done in sync, all at the same time. The commercial properties ought to be done the same way, with updated information. If there's something that is discovered during an inspection that wasn't known, such as a new addition in the back that was never picked up in the normal assessing process, it should be picked up. But the value should be updated when all the values are updated in the town. Sales analysis should be done. I outlined that in a regular revaluation, how that would be done. It should be done towards the end of the project, and everything brought up to date based on that sales analysis done during maybe the last 18 months or so of a revaluation or an update. And I think you ought to, if you do a phased-in revaluation, just as with a regular revaluation, you should include notification and hearings so that everybody gets notified of their new valuation, gets a chance to look it over for reasonableness, and come in and ask some questions, verify the data that their property is based on before a tax commitment is done on that valuation. I've outlined, starting on page 10, some of the things that are involved in regular tax assessment work. I think I've given you a little bit of that already. And I've given you a budget of how the work could be done on page 12 of my proposal, with a phased-in multi-year revaluation and year-to-year tax assessment services. And what I've based my proposal on is what I think you need, what I think is a reasonable way to proceed. I don't know what your exact budgetary capabilities are and how it should be accomplished, but I tried to give you at least 2 points of reference to see how it could be done. And if you need additional information about doing it in a more compressed time frame or more long-term time frame, I'm happy to try to fine-tune the appraisal to what you think can work in your town. And I want to emphasize that it is getting close to the end of January, and March and April are just around the corner, and you do have to make a decision on how you want to proceed with the tax assessment function, at least for the 2011 property tax year. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Go ahead.
And again, I think originally, before even all this happened, when I first got on the council, one of the things we were trying to do is do a total revaluation just to do it right, get it done. And we had a really hard time getting town support to actually fund it. And I don't think the funding in the town is any better now than it was then, probably a lot worse. So, I mean, the only thing that I could see happening is the idea of us making the point that if this needs to be done, to do it right and do it in a 2-year process, is possibly going to bond, and to get a bond to do it. I mean, whether it isn't really a great idea at this point in time, but unfortunately, we already seen what kind of piecemealing it does, and it doesn't always come out to our favor. You've done this a lot through a lot of other municipalities and towns. I mean, is that typically a funding mechanism that towns do? Is typically most towns, I assume, don't have that type of money sitting in a bank account. Do you see towns, or is that some part that you even get involved in? Do you see towns going, taking a bond out to do a reval? I mean, it's a long-term investment, of course, but I mean, to me, it only seems like that'd be our only avenue to fund this type of project.
I've done a lot of revaluation work for a long time. I started my own business in 1983. I usually don't get too involved in the funding mechanism for a revaluation. That's the town's business, how they raise the money. But I honestly think that not too many of the towns that I have done revaluations for have funded it with a bond. I think many towns may have funded it by spreading it over a couple fiscal years, so that it's not as burdensome as getting it done in 1 year. I think a number of towns have established a little bit of a reserve fund over a few years so that they could start it with a bit of a head start on the funding. But I don't think I have done, I wouldn't be a bit surprised at a town or two or three that I've done over the last nearly 30 years has been funded with a bond, but I don't think a large number of them have.
The other part of that is say if, right now you actually have people on staff for people to come into and ask for abatements and other concerns. If we were to somehow get funding for, say, a 2-year project, looking at that 3 to 310, is the idea of having someone here on staff for those 2 years part of that figure, or is that not part of that figure?
No, it's not part of that figure.
Okay.
A revaluation at a price range of $300,000 or $320,000, $310,000, that would be what I think a revaluation would cost just to do
The reval.
the revaluation.
I was just checking, just curious to see as far as when we, for the other part of the budget, whether or not that would fit in or not, that's all. I figured that's what the answer was going to be, but you have to ask, right?
Any other questions or comments from council?
No, I guess I would point out, I think it's a great proposal, and I think we need to do something. I would recommend that we discuss this as part of our workshops and try to figure out what's the best approach to try and take this. I mean, I think we have to come to a decision probably by the end of February as to how we're going to go forward with this, because we need to make sure we have somebody on retainer fee or whatever in place to do the next set of taxes, and then are we going to go out and do any of these extra things and get
Speaking of the
bits and
mic,
pieces?
he's having a hard time hearing.
Sorry about that. It don't seem to be too loud tonight. I was just saying that I think we should take care of this under the, should review this under the workshop for the budgets so that we can make a decision. I think we got to make that decision by February because we need to be able to do taxes by, for this year and determine this plan. So I would recommend that we go forward and do something like that.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Roger.
I would think that if we're gonna go out and spend $300,000, that we ought to be bringing in other firms and see what they've got to offer for us. There are other firms that are out there that are obviously in this economy, we could probably come up with some other ideas also. To just take one person's ideas, I think that we'd be selling the town short. And after the last couple of years of taxes in this town, I don't think we should be selling too many people any shorter than we already have.
All right, any further comments?
Yeah,
ahead,
just
Mike.
comment on that. I mean, we have looked at a number of different agencies to do this over the past years, prior to Mr. Eldridge coming on as well. And every one of them has been anywhere between $310,000 and $375,000 to go do a reevaluation, whenever you do it. So, I mean, we've been looking at it for the last, I'm gonna say, 6 years over time.
And I can understand that, Mike, but I still think that we ought to give the opportunity for other agencies to give us their findings and go from there.
That's something we can discuss, well, certainly whether we want to bid it out or not, or, any other comments? Laura, you raised your hand earlier.
I just wanted to be clear that there's actually two different figures here. It looks like a 2-year revaluation, you were estimating between 300 and 310,000, but if you look on page 12, it looks like a 4-year phased-in multi-year revaluation, and that total is 321,000.
That's right.
So, can you explain the difference between taking longer to do it, but costing more money over the long run?
I think there's an economy of doing it in a 2-year compressed time frame. It's, for me to mobilize and do things in a 2-year period time frame, I think I will accomplish it with a little less labor, with a little less cost than spreading it out over 4 years. And I can tell you that there's not one employee who works for me now who is not getting paid more than that employee got paid 4 years ago. And, I mean, that's just the reality.
All right, seeing no further questions or comments from the council, does anyone from the public have any questions or comments? All right, Dot, come to the microphone.
Dorothy Fitzgerald, a resident of Lisbon Falls. I should sit right next to the microphone. I believe, nothing against Mr. Van Turen's firm, but it's prudent to put anything out to bid. It's a prudent way to do business. And I'm wondering how much we have in undesignated surplus. If we could use a little bit of undesignated surplus to fund a revaluation.
We don't have that kind of money available. We have it available, we have that kind of money, but it's all funding that we use throughout the year to, as taxes come in and in between that. So we're at a minimum of what we should have in our undesignated fund balance to operate.
If I remember correctly, and I don't really have the figures on the top of my head, but I thought we had quite a bit of money in undesignated funds at the end of this past fiscal year, and a little more than normal. And I'm not saying fund all of it with undesignated funds, but part of it. A thought.
Yep, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the public? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on. Next issue, Twyla.
Order 2011-10, authorization to collect excise tax.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us what it's about, Steve?
In your packets, there's a letter that I sent to Mr. Cody. As under state law, it's my duty as tax collector to collect unpaid taxes, which includes also excise tax. There's a balance due on this account. In order for us to collect it, it seems, I need authorization from the council. There's a mechanism in state law that allows us to collect it by removing it from a stipend, or if he was an employee, we would do it also from their wages. So in order for me to collect, I need the council to approve that.
All right.
Mr. Lunton, I'd like to remove myself at this time to avoid any conflict of interest and proceed to the mic and address this as a citizen of the town.
How does the council feel about that? Do we want you to stay up here, or do you think we should go down?
I'd prefer to remove myself to remove that conflict of interest, if you don't mind.
The rest of the council all right with that?
He has the right to speak.
Yep, okay, certainly. All right.
My name is Roger Cody, Councilor of the Town of Lisbon, live up on Route 9. This could almost be comical if it wasn't so serious. In 2009, I purchased a new pickup truck. So I came into the town office to register it. I had 6 months left on my 2007 pickup registration, so I transferred the registration from my 2007 to my 2009. 6 months later, I returned to the town office to register the vehicle for the next year. I paid my excise tax of over $500, and I've got the registrations and to prove it. Well, 6 months later, it's now time for a sticker on my truck. It's a year old. So I pull into the Brunswick Ford dealership and ask them to put a sticker on my vehicle. They said, "Sir, we can't do that. Your truck is not registered." thought, "Well, that's kind of cool." So, after looking it over, I returned to the town office. And instead of registering my 2009 truck, they registered a 2007 truck that I prior owned that was now registered by somebody else and paid excise tax by somebody else in Brunswick. I had no proof of insurance for that vehicle, nor did I have proof of ownership, but they registered it. So, I had a vehicle that was on the road for 6 months with no registration. Very impressed. I came to the town office and I said, "What do we do about this?" Well, they gave me a new registration, told me they were very sorry it happened, validated the registration, said, "You're all set, Mr. Cody." Out the door I went. I didn't feel that I owed that excise tax for that 6 months if my truck wasn't registered, but you know, what you gonna do? I went down, got my sticker. A couple of weeks later, a month later, I get a letter in the mail saying that I owe the town excise tax on my truck. I said, "How can that be? I have a registration that states that you are satisfied with what I paid, and you validated it and sent me on my way." "Oh, well, it's the way it is." I didn't agree. So, I got a little further down the line and time to register again. I came into the town office. "You're not going to register that vehicle until you pay that excise tax from the prior year." But I didn't feel I owed it. And I still don't feel I owe it. What happened next was comical at best. I left the town office very upset, and I went to call the state, find out what laws were on the books and what I could do about it. Nobody knew. There's no laws on the books about it. So, I went back to the town office. I needed my truck registered. I gave her a check for the excise tax that I owed. Then I gave her a check for the registration of the vehicle for the year and paid another almost $600 excise tax. I got home and I called the state again. We discussed it in Lent. I didn't feel I owed it. I went down, I put a stop payment on the check for that excise tax. A month or so later, William Gagney, Sergeant, Detective Supervisor, Sheriff's Department, pays me a visit. Wanted to know everything. I had all my documentation, showed him everything I had. He says, "Well, I got to see the sticker on the truck." And I took him out, showed him the sticker on the truck. Guess he didn't believe me or something, I don't know. And he laughed. He says, "You probably won't be seeing me again." Well, I received a letter from Mr. Eldridge, which states he's the tax collector of the town of Lisbon. So I said, "Well, I better get me a book." So I got me a new law book. So I looked it up in Title 36, Chapter 105, Subchapter 9, Article 1, Section 893. That reads, "Any delinquent tax collector shall be at all times answerable to the inhabitants of his municipality." That's interesting. "For all sums which they have obliged to pay by means of his deficiency and all consequent damages. We just went through a tax season. I find that kind of interesting. So then, I read further down in the letter. Under Title 36, Chapter 105, Subchapter 9, Article 1, Section 95, it allows him to collect. So I went to my book. Mr. Eldridge, there's no such law. Sorry, but it's not a law. Section 95 does not exist. If you'd like to come up, Roger, I'll show you. It doesn't exist. But that's beside the point. We'll continue with that, because that doesn't make a whole lot of difference, I guess. We can just make up laws as we go. So then, I call the detective. I was investigated. Why was I never given any information about this investigation? He says, why was you not given information? Information was sent to your town. I says, how come I wasn't given any of that information? He says, that's a good question. He says, let me forward it to you. So he forwarded me a letter from Mr. Desjardins to the Chief of Police Brooks, coming from Norm Grotto, a district attorney. Why I was never given this, I don't know why, but I wasn't. Can I have Twyla read this so the people can hear what it says? So you know that I'm not making it up.
I don't know if that's appropriate, Roger, at the moment. To read
That's
the,
a letter.
read the entire letter. I think we can.
It's a very short letter. It's very
can I see it?
informational.
Let me see it. If you'd like to read it yourself, Roger, I think that'd probably be the most appropriate. And
I just didn't want somebody to think I was making it up.
well,
'cause
I
it's
saw it,
incredible.
so you know.
I'll make it short and sweet. Basically, what it says is that I was accused of, because I stopped payment on a check, I was accused of negotiating a worthless instrument. So they found me completely, there wasn't enough evidence to do anything about it. Basically, I was cleared. I also got a letter sent to me from the Attorney General's office. This got sent as high as the Attorney General's office. And the finding was the same. Not guilty of any crime. So while talking to the Sheriff's Department, they said, Mr. Cody, please do not call the Attorney General and the District Attorney anymore. They're getting very upset about this. We have spent several $1,000s to collect $138. Several $1,000s. This irates me. I don't know how any of you people feel, but I just am irate over this. If this was an attempt to shame me into paying something, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed that a 54-year resident gets treated like this when he tries to register a vehicle. I'm ashamed that a chief of police from our town will spend this kind of money foolishly. And I'm ashamed, Mr. Eldridge, of you. Desperately ashamed. And I'll tell you something else.
All right, thank you, Roger. Thank you,
I'm
Roger.
not finished, Mark,
Roger.
please.
All right, I don't want you to grandstand up there.
I'm not gonna
okay?
rant. I'm just very, very upset about this.
Roger,
This council
Roger,
can
you're-
vote any way they want to, sir.
I know, your time is up, Roger. I don't want you to be grandstanding up there.
It's always time up. Mr. Brooks had 2 hours, remember?
No, and that was not appropriate, and you said that was not appropriate.
I think this is a continuation, Mark, of the character assassination of me by this town manager, the chief of police, and anything associated. Thank you. Do what you wish.
Thank you, Roger. All right. Do I have any further comments or questions from council on this issue? Go ahead, Roger.
Steve, what, if it was a regular citizen that had done this, what would the town's recourse have been?
It would have been the same process. I can tell you, Kathleen Bailey, the deputy tax collector, came to me and asked how we wanted to handle this because it was a counselor. And my comment to her was we handle it just like we do any other citizen. We sent registered letters. Prior to that, we had sent several letters with no response. It sent a registered letter, nothing, no response again. So what we normally would do, if we have a check that came back, we would hand it over to our police department to do an investigation, which we did. And after the investigation was done, we were recommended to hand it over to the county sheriff's department for them to follow up because it was a local counselor involved and it would be a bit of a conflict. But we follow the same procedures that we would do for anybody to collect taxes.
So is this major thing, is it about the canceled check or is it about the excise tax?
It's a method to collect the excise tax that was due. That's what it was about.
Well, I'd like to say one thing. I had a friend that came in, a couple of years ago to register his truck. And they charged him $21 to register his truck. He says, no. He says, he stood right here twice and they said, they argued with him and said that's what it was, $21. Well, it should have been $150 some odd dollars. Well, so he walked out, paid the $21 and walked out. But he did save the money. When he went back to re-register the truck, it was the regular price, but they never charged him the extra for last year. So the computer does make mistakes.
The computer the computer doesn't make mistakes. It's the people that generally make the mistake and that's not an uncommon. Unfortunately, people are human. They might be in a hurry, whatever the reason be, they make a mistake. At the end of the night, hopefully we catch those mistakes when we go to balance out. We have people that have to report to the Secretary of State for excise tax and for stickers. We do that on a weekly or monthly basis, and sometimes we catch mistakes, and this is how we rectify them. It still does not allow anybody to avoid paying taxes, and we treat that person like we would anybody else. There's a process in place that they have used in the past, and it's our duty to collect, and if we find a mistake, and which we did.
Can I ask you a question?
You can, yes.
My truck wasn't registered for 6 months. Does that mean that excise tax doesn't have to be paid? I didn't get my service.
You had your stickers, though, didn't you?
So did the guy in Brunswick that owned that truck, that you registered falsely.
It was a mistake, Roger. And all we're trying to do is collect the money that's due, and that's appropriate, period.
Do what you gotta do, I don't care.
Mark, may I?
Yes, certainly.
Steve, maybe you can answer the question is, at what point the process that went through as far as for the check that was canceled, is there a dollar amount after how much, or if there's a check that goes bad, or actually is canceled, it's a certain dollar amount that process is? Is it, I thought it might have been $50, is that still the case if you have a check that's canceled, avoided? I'm not sure how that I mean, after a certain dollar amount, typically that would actually be the
Well, if
process.
somebody puts a stop payment, they get charged for that on their own account. If we get a check back, normally there's a fee involved, but our bank does not charge us for that, generally.
Okay, any further questions or comments from council? Anything from the public? Go ahead, Mr. Fillmore.
I'm Larry Fillmore from Lisbon. First of all, I find it very distasteful that we're bringing this out in an open session. I think, first of all, because it is a counselor, that this should have been handled in executive session.
All I can say, Mr. Fillmore, is he asked to have it in
Okay.
public.
Now, the first thing that I have to say is that he has documentation that says that the town office screwed up. It wasn't him that screwed up. It was the town office that screwed up. That's the first thing. The second thing is, he went through the entire process. Mr. Eldridge, do you have those documents from the Attorney General and from the District Attorney?
I have copies of it, yes.
Yes. Then why are we here? If they cleared him and it's the town's office screwed it up to begin with, why are we jumping in his case? We need to be jumping in the town office's case because they're the ones that screwed it up.
Okay, Larry, all right. Now, if you make a mistake happens on the paperwork, that does not remove your obligations to pay taxes. And if they overbilled you, for instance, you'd certainly want them to pay you back. You wouldn't want it to just say, well, sorry, it was on the paper, so we don't have to pay you back.
He paid everything he was supposed to pay.
But no, but what he owes is what he actually has to pay, not what was accidentally printed on a piece of paper, Larry.
The Attorney General and
They can't clear you. All they can do is say, we don't have enough evidence to prosecute you. That's not saying you're proven non-guilty.
No, not you, I will.
All right, any further questions or comments?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
May I address
Yes.
Mr. Bickford? He had brought up somebody that actually had come in, had the similar situation, did not have to pay it. We have
Certainly
one.
should.
Right, I understand that, but the comment was that they didn't have to pay it the next year. They paid the true amount the next year, but not anything in the past. So now you've got one person who had to pay, another person who didn't.
All I can say, Michelle, is that if one person gets away with breaking the law, that doesn't justify everyone else doing it.
I didn't say we did, but I would just appreciate consideration to be allowed to finish my thought, please.
Right.
I try to show you guys the same respect. I would just ask for the same. I just want to be clear that going forward that the same precedence is going to be set for everybody because it appears based on the information that's being brought forth by one counselor and from another counselor is not the way it has been up to this point. I agree that, if you owe taxes, you owe taxes. However, I also understand, though, that during the 6 months that he didn't have registration, there could have been additional issues if he had gotten pulled over, gotten a ticket, or gotten anything else. There are other ramifications, much more severe than $138 that would have applied. So, if you have a comment, Mr. Eldridge, I would welcome it. I'm
This
just
is a
saying
tax
there are
issue,
additional
Michelle.
things.
This has nothing to do with a what if.
I
It's
understand
very
that, but
black
you
and
made a
white.
mistake.
There's a tax owed, a tax was not paid, the person was notified, he chose to ignore this. This is the process that we go through for everybody.
No, you don't.
If
Mr. Bickford
they're
brought
an
up one, someone who
employee, well,
hasn't.
I can't speak to that.
Right.
Okay? That's what a friend told you. I hope that isn't the case. Since I've been here, and Kathleen, the deputy tax collector, was told to handle this just like she would any other person. And that's what she did. There's a
Okay.
process in place, and we followed the process. And the person chose not to come in and pay his excise tax owed, so we take it to the next step,
Okay.
okay?
The other issue would be, you made reference in your letter to a law. I actually went out and researched to see if that existed based on current documentation. I myself couldn't find the law that was referenced. Do we have anything to support that before we take action on something that it actually isn't there?
Yes,
Can
this
somebody show where
went
that is?
before our attorney, and he's sitting in the audience,
I just want to know that before we do this, that there isn't a law on the book somewhere that permits it to be done, because, again, it's one of those dotting your i's and crossing your t's. I want to know before you guys vote on this, is it out there? Because I myself couldn't find it.
We went on the advice of our attorney who quoted the law.
That's
Before
not
the
what I'm
letter was
asking.
sent, we did our homework.
Do we have proof that it's out there is what I'm asking? Do we have something that we can find it on to be able to show? Because it's been raised, I think it's an issue that should be brought forward and addressed.
Thank you, Michelle.
Can we bring that forward and address it before you take a vote? I think it's
The
appropriate
issue of
to
the law,
make
I'll
sure.
certainly ask our lawyer to comment before we.
Okay. I just would like it
Take a vote,
resolved, because
yes.
that was another issue.
Yep, thank you.
I have a comment.
Yes.
When Roger went up, I was feeling a bit bad for him. That doesn't happen often, but I was. And I find that Roger's the one who asked to have this in a public forum. I think that he's the one that caused it to become the circus it's becoming. I felt at first that possibly he didn't need to pay the money, but in my opinion, the acknowledgement was when he wrote the check, when he wrote that second check. In my opinion, he acknowledged that he owed the tax. And to stop payment on a check that you wrote, knowing that you owed the tax, and to stop payment on it, I have a problem with that one issue.
May I say something to
Sure.
that?
Yes, you may.
The reason I gave her the check for the excise tax is because she refused to register my truck, and the registration was running out. But when I spoke to Mr. Muldew, Muldew is it? Ledoux, from the state, he said, there's nothing on the books, and he says, I don't know how to rule on this myself. He says, I'd like to know how it's gonna go, I don't know. He says, personally, when you signed this when they gave you a validated contract and told you was all set, he says, that tells me that you fulfilled your commitment to the town, otherwise you would not get your registration. And when you have a validated registration, the only way you can get it is to completely pay your excise tax.
The other problem I have with the issue, I've had quite a few new cars in my time, and generally when you buy a new car, you know it's going to be pretty expensive to register it. So I guess that's the other thing that I think you should have noticed, Roger, what vehicle was registered.
Do you always look at your registration?
Yes, I do.
I certainly do.
Absolutely do. Yep, I do.
All right, I'd like to hear from Mr. Terrio on the issues that have been raised here.
Mr. Chairman and Council, there are two statutes that are pertinent. I'll give Twyla copies of them, so you'll have them for your records. Title 36, Section 1487, establishes the obligation of the tax collector to collect excise taxes. It says, in the case of municipalities, the municipal tax collector shall collect such excise tax and deposit the money received with the municipal treasurer. So clearly the obligation is there to do it. Then the item tonight, the set-off, is permitted under Section 905, not 95, of Title 36. And it says in pertinent part, subject to the approval of the municipal officers, the treasurer or any dispersing officer of any municipality may, if so requested by the tax collector, which is what's in front of you tonight, withhold payment of any money then due and payable to the taxpayer. So this involves not just employees, anybody that does business with the town, anybody to whom the town owes money would be in a situation where this statute would be applicable.
Any further questions or comments? All right, certainly. Go ahead, ma'am, if you'd like to speak first. Yes, please use the microphone.
Mr. Bickford mentioned that he knew someone that had had a mistake made. And I would also like to relate a scenario in which I know of a local citizen who had a grievous mistake made. This local citizen had a very expensive new RV. Someone who worked, an employee who worked here at the time and still works here, made a very huge mistake by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, not charging the correct amount for the RV excise. And when the local citizen was called at home, the local citizen said, "I'm not paying it. They made a big mistake. I am not paying it." Nothing ever happened. This person, owed the town hundreds upon hundreds of dollars, never paid it, not a word was said. So I'm just relating one instance that I happen to know of by a local citizen, and this was a very expensive RV. And nothing was ever done, and it was left alone. The next year, this person agreed to pay the correct amount. Why weren't the police called out on this person? Why not? If this is the way the town handles things, why wasn't this person brought to bear? Like Mr. Cody. And this was way more money on a huge mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And I think the issue here specifically is the stop payment issue. I think that's why it went to the law enforcement issue. All right, Fern?
When the registration was done, they were just following the process they typically do. It isn't like the person was doing calculations ahead and came up with the money. It's basically when they put it into the computer, it shows a balance, and that's what they were working off of to register the vehicle, was equaling it out in the computer to make the balance correct. It's a process they do
Every day.
every day for any particular person that would come in.
Mr. Lunt?
Yes, go ahead.
Steve, do I get the same stipend?
Yep, you do.
Well, we put a lot of effort, and we've spent a lot of time on this. Why don't you just take it out of my stipends? We'll cancel it, that's it.
Not appropriate.
It's very generous, but I don't think that's...
Well, we've spent a lot of time on this, and we've got other businesses a lot more important.
Well, that's up to your chairman to move on.
Are we gonna reimburse the Androscoggin County for the amount of money spent chasing this crazy?
That's their job.
It's almost $4,000.
I don't know what it costs the county. It's their job. We pay taxes for that.
So do I, believe me.
All right, do I hear any motions on this from the council?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
I'll make the motion. I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? Those opposed? Motion fails.
How about abstentions?
Are you, okay, any abstentions? All right, motion fails 4 to 2 to 1. 3 to 1.
Motion.
That's only,
What?
oh,
I'm trying to-
six. It
Okay,
is
all those in favor? Those opposed? Yep, and abstaining? Okay, 3 to 1. Passes, okay, you're right.
Motion carried.
Motion carried, yes, correct. I'm sorry, Roger, I think you owe the money.
It's not a problem, but this ain't the end of it, I can tell you that.
And I agree with you, Roger, that we have issues in the front office that we need to work on getting that corrected there. Certainly, people have brought up serious issues that we need to look into.
This will be pushed into the court of law and continued. Hang on, folks.
All right, next issue, Twyla?
Under other business, Finance Director's report.
Hello. All right. This is for the month of December. And looking at the revenues, or starting with revenues, looking at the tax commitment line, just to explain something on your report. This line is showing an overcollection of the 9.5, but it's a timing issue of when we recommitted the taxes. And a journal entry's been done in January to do the reversal of the initial commitment. So that will be back in line by the end of January. So moving on from that, excise tax, we're approximately 45% collected. Last year for the month of December, we had 72,000 that we collected in excise tax. This year, we've collected only 67,000. So we have a slight dip, but we're still looking to be on target by the end of the year. State revenue sharing is 51% collected, with 59,000 coming in for December. So far, we're looking to be on track with collection, being that halfway through the year, we're 50% collected, but as we know with the state, anything can change, so we'll continue to monitor that through the remainder of the year. In December, we collected 25,000 for the URIP program, and that puts us at 45% collected to date on that. The transfer station brought in another 5,000 for the month of December. We are 58% collected for a year-to-date total of 72,000. We are 95% collected on our Parks and Recreation revenue. The month of December brought in $1,200 in our before-school care program and just over $800 for winter sports participation. The library brought in over $200 in non-resident revenue and just under $100 in their copy fax revenue. And we are 51% collected on our total tax commitment for the year, which is better than we were at this point last year, which was only 49% collected. Do you have any questions or further questions for me on revenues?
Any questions from the council?
No, looks good.
Where were we last year on the revenue sharing at this point, as far as dollar-wise? Were we,
Dollar-wise, we were,
right now we're at 59? Just
actually, I don't have last year's report right in front of me, but I can get you that number.
I was just curious if it was quite a bit. I realize where we are percentage-wise, but if that percentage is different than what it was last year, that's all.
I believe, if I remember, it was pretty similar. I think it may have been only like 46% collected, right around there, so. I just don't have the dollar value.
That's
right in
fine,
front
I
of
was just curious.
Okay, moving on, the expense side, we are 84% expended on legal charges. The retirement account is currently reflecting that we are 93% expended, but we will be doing a quarterly adjustment to that account, or there is a quarterly adjustment that gets done on that account, which was done in January this year. So next month, that will be reflected more in line with where it should be. The town engineer's expense now reflects a transfer of the remaining funds for the Route 9 projects, so we're looking more in line with budget there. And other than that, everything else looks to be right on track with where we should be at this stage in the year. So unless you have any questions for me, that's my report.
I'm assuming we're gonna take a hit on winter operations in
Yeah, I
January.
I would only
Yeah.
assume, yeah.
We'll see. Yeah. You never know. February may have no snow.
Might use that extra sand.
Right,
Beach
yes.
weather, right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, Twyla?
B, recall process.
This was asked to be put on the agenda to discuss the recall process. My recommendation would be to have a workshop and to talk about all of the charter amendment issues that we had. If you want to talk about this, that's fine tonight. You have a pretty full docket here, but I think it would be very prudent for us to, we had, I think, 10 or 11 issues in the charter that we wanted to amend, 2 years ago, which we haven't been back to. This would be a good opportunity, maybe next month, to bring it back on the workshop on our second meeting of the month to start discussing that. We have until November when we want to really bring it before the public for a vote. It might be prudent to do that. And that's up to you.
Okay. Any comments?
I
My
mean,
turn?
I would ask that not only do we actually have a workshop on it, but both this and for the budget vote, I mean, I would like to have as much information as you can pull together to find out on on other towns have recalls in their charters, what's actually put out there for a review process prior. And also, the next item we're going to talk about on the vote, the other towns, we've talked about it, I haven't had much other information on what towns actually do, as far as for if they are going to do a vote. If we're going to have a workshop on it, it'd be nice to have as much information as possible to talk about.
Roger and I have been compiling other charters that have the recall. There's a lot more meat to it than what we have. And Twyla, I think, had done it. We had done a survey on all the other communities that were doing a referendum vote. We still have that data, so we can certainly bring it to the meeting.
And not just the towns, but actually what they're using for a process and guidelines to go by.
Yep. Yep, we can do that.
Any other questions or comments? I certainly agree with the idea of scheduling a workshop on that. I think it makes a lot of sense, and probably also on the next item also, since it seems to be something that we have a lot of, things to debate on that, and we need to really work out the language on both of those. So does the council want to look at setting a workshop to deal with this issue?
Yes.
Okay, what would be
We can set it up for our second meeting of February, which would be the 15th. We'll do another light agenda. That's what we had talked about doing, trying to keep the second meeting of the month, our business quite light, so we could spend most of our time in a workshop environment. That way it doesn't bring you here on an extra night.
May I ask, could we actually just focus on these two items? I know we have other items that need to be addressed, but these two issues, I think, would take a good part of a workshop.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dot. You have something to say?
Yeah, I was waiting for you.
All right, thank
to-
you.
I attended the workshop a few weeks ago. It was a workshop, and I couldn't speak, but the former town manager of the town of Brunswick did an excellent workshop for all of the town council members. I was very, very impressed with him and with his knowledge. And he mentioned the town charter. He was surprised that it wasn't up to the standards, or it was a lot different than the standards of other towns. And if I could suggest maybe bringing him in on revisions to the town charter, I think it might be prudent to get someone of his caliber's insight to review the town charter and in making changes. A suggestion. I really hope you pay attention to it.
Thank you, Dot. I think that's a good suggestion, and I think we also want to have it run by Mr. Terrio, who I know wasn't involved in creating the charter, and has some opinions on it, so.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Anything from the public? Anyone else? All right, sir, if you take the podium.
Good evening. My name is Tom Finkel. I live at 33 Borough Road, Lisbon Falls. And I wrote the town manager a letter a couple weeks ago because I fell and injured myself in front of the post office in Lisbon Falls. And he addressed my letter promptly and professionally, and I thank you for that. I have a couple other issues with snow removal I'd like to bring to your attention.
So I want to tell you that's not right on this item. There is a section for audience participation if you want to bring up new items.
Oh,
you can certainly jump in then. I'll make sure to remember you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion on the recall process and our scheduling a workshop for that? All right, do I hear any, do I need a motion on that? Okay, schedule a workshop. All right, so next item?
Is municipal budget referendum vote? Or did you already accomplish?
Did we miss town manager report? No, I think that's next. Okay,
Oh,
and Councilor Cody had brought this to me that he would like to discuss the municipal referendum vote. And I know we've talked about that a lot in the past, and I think we definitely will need to set up a workshop. And if there's anything additional you want to go over tonight, Roger?
We're gonna have a workshop. I don't see any purpose to it.
Okay, anything from the public? Since you won't be able to speak at the workshop, if you have any comments, it's a good time now to give them to us. What? I'm sure we'll have a public hearing before we put anything out to vote on, yes. But, if you want to give comments before the public hearing, before the workshop, this is the time. Okay, seeing no comments, we'll move on.
Okay, next item is town manager's report.
I just, to follow up on what I had given you earlier for the 18th, the gazebo and LES, we voted to have it removed. Buttons will be taking care of that in the spring when the snow is gone. We were hoping to get to it earlier, but we've been pounded on. I'd also just like to make congratulations to Chief Brooks and Chief Gallipo for the $31,000 grant we received for something that we have to do this coming year for communications. We had budgeted, looked at estimates of around 40,000, so this 31,000 gets us almost there, and it'll be save the taxpayer some money. And that's all I have at this point.
Mark,
Yes. So Mike,
is there a grant with that? Is there a matching funds with that? or-
No matching on that. The grant matching? No. Thank you.
We will have costs associated.
Yeah, there will be
Not
costs.
Put up 10% of the money or anything like that.
There was no matching formula in that particular grant.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Roger?
I'd like to bring something up here. The demolishment of the building on Village Street was noted in the notes here. Nothing was said about it. The building was demolished. It was burnt down.
Yes.
All the pictures are posted on Facebook. Very distasteful. Very distasteful. To burn a person's house down, plaster the internet with pictures of it, KKK style, I think is very distasteful for the town of Lisbon. And I'd just like to bring that up. That was on Facebook right now.
Yeah, I'm not really happy to hear that's on Facebook, so.
Well, it is. You can go right on to the Lisbon Fire Department Facebook site, and you can look at all the beautiful pictures of burning a man's house down. Very Christian-like.
Very distasteful and very unlawful. And the end is not here yet.
All right, thank you. Next item, Twyla?
The end is not here yet in this house.
Is under audience participation. At this time, those in the audience who wish to address the council may come forward, use the microphone at the podium, state your name for the audience here and at home.
All right, Mr. Fillmore?
I'm Larry Fillmore. I want to update the citizens of the town of Lisbon as to the cost of having to do the recommitment. We paid the new tax assessor $8,644 to do the new commitment. The postage was $330, which brings us to $8,974. Now that's not all the cost because I can't compute the missing costs for the paper, the printing, and the labor by the town office personnel. But it's setting at $8,974 to do a reevaluation. The reevaluation had to be done because of the lack of an individual to properly supervise the tax assessor. It is my opinion, and I recommend that the board, the council here, deduct this amount of money from that individual's pay based upon the fact that we pay enough taxes. It wasn't our screw up. We didn't have anything to do with it. So why do we have to pay the $10,000 to cover somebody's screw up? That's not right. So I'm entertaining to see if anybody on the council will make a motion to have this amount of money deducted from the town manager's salary.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. We're in audience participation right now. We couldn't take a vote right now if we wanted to. But I believe that it would be illegal under our contract for us to be able to deduct that from his salary. If we did, he could probably sue us.
Oh, that's a pleasure. Okay, on 8 November, I sent a letter to the council requesting termination of the town manager for violations of our charter with this tax situation. Since then, I've got nothing from the council. No action since 8 November. Since then, he has violated our charter 8 more times. When is this going to stop? When are you going to take the action that you need to take to correct this? The town can't move forward if we're going to continually violate our charter, okay? And it doesn't look good for us. We can't heal ourselves until we get rid of the town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore.
One other thing I'd like to ask. Who hired the town attorney?
Who hired the town attorney? He's been with us for many, many years, long before I was here.
I didn't
before
ask
Mr.
you.
Eldridge was
I
here.
didn't ask you that. Mr. Terrio, who hired you? 1988. Because the charter says the town manager has to hire him, so do we have a town attorney?
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Any other further comments from the public? Michelle?
I wanted to thank Mr. Terrio for bringing the information. I just want to know that what was in the vote you took, the documentation, was the corrected statute there, since it wasn't in the letter that was addressed originally to Councilor Cody? Was it corrected?
I believe
your vote was-
it will be when any action is taken on it, yes.
Okay, well, because when you vote on that and you vote to take action, don't you now have to sign that after this meeting?
We will, yes, yeah. No?
No,
You don't have to sign.
All you're doing is authorizing the town manager to go forward.
You don't have to
Okay.
vote.
So before any action is taken, though, you'll make sure that it is correct, because it originally wasn't? Okay. When at one point, and it's, I don't know, it's maybe been 2 years, people had asked, and I believe Mr. Bowie was counselor at that time, that when things pertain to needing legal counsel, like an executive session, or perhaps it was around the area that involved Counselor Cody, that those things be brought to the front of the agenda so as we're not paying counsel to be here an entire meeting. I know it was raised a while ago, and at one point we were kind of being very prudent about doing that, because we're already at 83%, and we've still got 5 more months approximately left in this budget, not quite. Is that not something we can give consideration to help not overexpend our legal, just so that we can be a little more prudent about that and bring those things to the forefront? Is there anything that says you cannot go into executive session first and address those things so that he doesn't have to be here?
I think we certainly can when there's, an ability, we try to work with that, but sometimes we need him here for the whole meeting, or, sometimes it has to be at the end. I mean, I don't really want to make the public wait around for an hour and a half without knowing when the open meeting will start.
I'd rather wait on my time, since I'm not charging you a bill to be here, quite honestly, especially since we're at the 83%. I mean, I think it's a little concerning. We don't want to go over our 100% amount expended for the year. So I'm just asking, is it not something we can be a little conscientious of as we get closer to the end of the year? The other thing I wanted to ask about was, when I come to the podium, I don't raise my voice. I come to speak. It's supposed to be my opportunity to speak, just as it is for anybody else in the public. I don't raise my voice and speak out, when other people are trying to speak, as well as you guys. You guys have talked about council rules in regards to the public. I'd like to see some reciprocation from the councilors, not interrupting people at the podium. I don't think it's appropriate behavior to be whispering and talking, address the people when it's time, but I don't think it's appropriate to be whispering. I find it a little interruptive when I hear other people sometimes in the audience whispering and making comments, because then I can't hear what you're saying, and I have to go home and watch it a few days later to hear what I missed. And I'm just asking, you guys put out rules to the public, and I would just like to ask that the same consideration and respect be given to people when we're at the podium. We come to the meetings, we try to participate, we try to give our feedback, try to ask questions to get information out there, and I would just like to know that the same level of respect would be given back and forth.
Thank you.
Just something simple. Thank you.
All right, sir, now is the correct time.
Tom will do. My name is Tom Finkel once again. I live on 33 Borough Road, Lisbon Falls. And as I said before, I forwarded a letter 2 weeks ago to the town manager, and he supposedly forwarded a copy to the council. I wanted to address a few issues with snow removal, if I could. I fell and injured myself in front of the Lisbon Falls post office, and it was directly due to frozen snow banks with no opening or access to the post office. You have a handicap parking space there, and you have a pedestrian crosswalk. It is not cleared, and my concern is especially for elderly residents. They have to walk out into the road and out into the entrance and exits of the parking lots to get into the post office. So I request that be looked at and cleared after the storms. And my other question to you would be, I noticed this year we're not sanding the sidewalks anymore.
Yeah, we are.
Are we?
Yep.
It's pretty hard to find. I may be wrong. And there were some sidewalks that weren't being cleared also. Are we doing that to save money, or are we going to get better at that? Like, I saw a lot of the other issues have been addressed that I talked about in my letter.
They are removing snow from the sidewalks, from all the sidewalks that we have normally done. I'd have to go check at the list, but we're not doing anything different than's been done before.
Oh,
So
well, I would
it may
ask.
be a while before they get to it, but
Okay,
they are getting to it.
okay. So just wanted to bring that to your attention and ask that you look at those items. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I think the issue there was that we bought a new machine this year to do it in-house, try to save some money for people. And, you know, it takes a storm or two for them to really learn how to do it themselves.
They're getting better.
I think they'll improve. Any further audience participation? Go ahead, sir.
My name's Rick Graham. I live on Webster Road. Mr. Chairman, I have a copy of the Town of Lisbon Council Working Rules. I am looking at Section D under public comment. It says in part, purpose of public comment to the council is to for the council to receive input from general public. It is not intended, nor shall it be construed as an opportunity for debate. All public comments shall be conducted in accordance with the rules of decorum set forth in Section 5, and so on and so forth. Also says in part, no public comment shall be allowed which has the effect of embarrassing or attacking the character of individual council, and the rule shall be liberally construed and strictly enforced. I'm begging the chair to stick to this rule and to enforce it at every opportunity.
Thank you. All right, any further public comments? All right, ma'am, take the podium, please.
That's a guy.
Sorry, sir, sorry.
Good evening, councilors. Good evening, Mr. Eldridge, Town Manager. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here tonight in regards to the little fire we had on Village Street. The first thing I'm going to do is hand the town clerk a notice of claim.
Sir, could you please state your name for the record?
Okay, my name is Richard Michael Suhar. I'm a resident of China, Maine. I have an interest in this with Mr. Thibodeau.
Would you have your address too, sir?
P.O. Box 6181, China Village, 04926. Just where the councilors and town manager get the authority to condemn a home, burn it down, which was under prepare with a legal contract to the town of Lisbon, a building permit. Mr. Thibodeau was under contract with a building permit, repairing his building at the time. Is that still a valid contract, or did you councilors decide to revoke it somewhere along the line? Was it ever approved, the revoking of that contract? Also involved was a engineer.
Was he hired to oversee the repairs of that building? Or was he hired to condemn the building? And who hired a private engineering firm to oversee building permits? The question is where is it authorized in the town building code? And does it apply to everybody to have an engineer oversee their building permits? And does the applicant have to pay for it? The next question is, can the tax collector legally apply a special tax on property to collect those fees for an engineer? The other question is, if attorney's fees are involved, can the tax collector apply those fees to a property tax, no matter what the cost? And that cost was running about $4,000. Does the Lisbon Town Council have ever approved any of that prior to or even today? Mr. Dribbledall has constitutional secured rights. And they are, number one, natural rights. All persons are born equally free and independent and have a certain natural, inherent, and unalienable rights, among those which are enjoying and defending life, liberty, acquiring, possessing, protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety and happiness. Section 5, unreasonable search is prohibited. The people shall be secure in their persons, their houses, their papers, their possessions, from all unreasonable searches and seizures. And no warrant to search any place or search any person or thing shall be issued without special designation of the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized, nor without probable cause, supported by oath of affirmation. Whether the town officials have the authority to enter upon the property of Roger Thibodeau without a warrant. Whether the town officials have a warrant to seize his property and burn it. That's a constitutional right you're interfering with, gentlemen, ladies.
All right, sir, I think that's an issue for the lawyers and not for our public debate here.
It's definitely for the public debate because you are under oath of office, my dear sir, to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Maine.
Yes, we're aware of that, I think, and I
If
think
you're
that's
aware of that, sir, then how come you where did you get the authority to burn a man's house down?
Sir, it's not up for debate. It happened, most of these votes were
This
taken
is
long
very
before I
much
was
for
here.
a debate because you are going to debate it somewhere else if you're not careful, sir.
And that's your choice, but we're moving on now. All right.
Have an oath of office,
Sir.
councilors. Where do you have the
Out of order.
constitutional right to seize a man's house and burn it down?
Sir, don't make me ask you to be removed from the room. All right, next item, Twyla.
Is under councilor communications.
All right, any councilor communications?
You may have to ask me to be removed from the room,
I
sir.
will if I have to.
I got a few more questions
Oh,
I
you're
want
not
to
in
say.
order. Could I have this
Do
person?
the town councilors
All
meet
right.
in private behind closed doors and discuss the fact that Reggie Thibodeau is a dark man,
Brooks,
dark-skinned
I need
black
some
man?
help here. I can't. How do I remove this person from the office, the room?
Well,
here?
you get yourself a man in a uniform, usually. Okay, we'll address it in black ink on white paper.
You're
Thank
free
you, sir.
to. All right, councilor communications. Do we have any councilor communications?
Just want to make a comment that, along with the sidewalk cleaning, I think Buttons has actually had his hands full this year, as far as for cleaning snow, and it looks like we're not out of the woods yet, so, I think it's gonna be really important for town people to give a little patience, because I think it's not getting any easier with the tall snow bankings and everything that's in town as far as for clearing, so, I think they're doing a good job, and anybody that comes through, at least through the shop, actually says they know a big difference when they cross the town line, so I think we ought to commend them on it, and, hopefully we purchase that sand well, because I think we're gonna use all of it before the end of the year this year, so.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I know I've been on vacation, so it's probably already been said, but I think that the sign in front of the high school has been a great asset. I think that looks really good, and I think it dresses up the high school really well, and I think it's a good thing.
Thank you. All right, next item, Twyla.
Is an executive session. Order 2011-12 to go into executive session per 1 MRSA Section 405-6A Personnel Matters and 1 MRSA Section 405-6D Labor
That's why I think we'd like
Negotiations.
to do the workshop first so that we can then do the executive session afterwards so that people don't have to try to hang around for an hour for us. So we did.
Make a motion that we go into recess for the duration to hold the workshop.
Do I have a second for that?
I'll second that.
All those in favor? All those opposed? All right, we're going into recess for the duration of the workshop and then come back into a meeting for the executive session. Thank you.